I wasn't looking for anything that night. Not love, not lust, not even conversation. I just needed the clink of ice in my glass and the dim glow of neon lights to numb a long week. But in the span of a heartbeat, everything changed, because as I reached for my drink, he looked at me and smiled like he already knew me. There was something about the way his eyes held mine, like he was asking a question I didn't yet understand, but instinctively wanted to answer. Before I knew it, my body had leaned toward him, as if drawn by a silent force, and within minutes, we were talking like old lovers reunited by fate rather than strangers on bar stools. I'll admit it, when I walked into the Rusty Lantern, tucked between a closed bookstore and a laundromat that hadn't seen fresh paint in years, I only wanted to unwind. The rain had soaked through my jeans, and the chill in the air made me crave solitude more than company. But solitude had other plans. The bar was quiet, mostly locals, mostly men, mostly quiet. I took the stool at the far end, near the jukebox playing soft 90s R&B. I was halfway through my second whiskey when he walked in. Tall, dark hair slicked from the rain, leather jacket clinging to his frame like it had grown there. His name was Elias, and I found that out only after we had laughed twice, toasted once, and shared a gaze that lasted just a beat too long to be casual. He sat one seat over at first, ordered a bourbon neat, and nodded at me like he knew I'd been waiting. I hadn't, but now I couldn't remember why. We started talking about music first. He commented on the Boys Teeth Tunnels, Men track playing, and somehow that spiraled into a conversation about heartbreak, therapy, and his obsession with baking sourdough bread. I was thrown off, charmed, disarmed, and intrigued. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was just real, in a way that made my own guard crumble without warning. "I like this song," he said, sipping his drink, his fingers brushing mine as he rested his arm on the bar. "You don't meet a lot of guys who sit alone in gay bars listening to sad music. What's your story?" I didn't give him the real one, not yet. Just enough to make him curious, but not enough to scare him away. But he didn't seem afraid. He seemed patient, present, like he could see what I was hiding and was willing to wait for me to show it. The moment our hands touched again, this time not by accident, I felt the spark. A literal warmth traveled up my arm, like my body had been asleep and he had just nudged it awake. I looked at him. He looked at me, and then he said, "Want to get out of here?" I don't remember saying yes, but I remember the walk to the door. I remember the way he held the umbrella slightly over me more than himself, and the way he looked down at my mouth when I thanked him. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but neither of us noticed anymore. We didn't rush. We didn't speak. We just moved as if our bodies had choreographed this moment long before we'd ever met. In the elevator to his building, we stood close, shoulders brushing, breath shared, tension coiled tight between us. And when the door closed behind us, and the quiet of his apartment wrapped around us like a secret, we didn't speak for a moment. We just stood there, looking at each other, the city humming outside like background music. Then, with slow certainty, he stepped closer and reached up to touch my jaw. That's when I knew I hadn't come to the bar for a drink. I'd come to find him. I'd been kissed before, plenty of times, but there was something about the way Elias's lips hovered just a breath away from mine that made this moment feel brand new. He didn't rush, didn't lunge. He just stood close enough for me to smell the rain in his hair and the faint scent of his cologne, something woody, warm, and a little spicy. And I realized he was giving me space to choose. And I did. The moment our lips met, it was slow and searching, a quiet kind of intensity that wrapped around us like the storm outside. My fingers curled into the collar of his damp jacket as his hands found my waist, warm and firm. We kissed like two people who had both been hungry for something we couldn't name, until we found it in each other. He broke the kiss gently, his forehead resting against mine, and whispered, "You okay?" in a voice that was low and careful, like he was checking in on something fragile. I nodded, but even that felt too loud in the soft electricity between us. The apartment was cozy, with an open layout and big windows where the city lights flickered behind curtains that danced with the wind. He led me to the couch, where we sat side by side, our legs touching lightly. He took off his jacket and tossed it over the armrest, then turned to me again, one hand brushing back my still damp hair. "I don't usually bring people home," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't usually follow strangers," I replied, my smile crooked, my pulse still too fast. He laughed, and the sound was rich, smooth, almost musical. That laugh made me want to hear more. His stories, his dreams, the things he never told anyone. But before I could chase that thought further, he leaned in again, this time kissing the side of my neck, his lips soft and deliberate. Each kiss was slower than the last, like he was writing his name into my skin, and my body leaned into his touch instinctively. His hand slid under my shirt, fingertips exploring my back with a tenderness I didn't expect. I closed my eyes, letting his warmth replace the chill that had followed me in from the street. He kissed my collarbone, then trailed his mouth back up to my ear. "Do you want to stay?" he murmured. "I don't want to be anywhere else," I said, not even recognizing my own voice, deeper, more certain than I'd heard it in years. Elias stood and held out his hand. I took it without hesitation, and he led me into his bedroom. The lights were low, and the room smelled faintly of linen and cedar. There was no music, no background noise, just the soft sound of the rain and the tension crackling in the air. He undressed slowly, deliberately, not to seduce, but to show, to share. And I did the same, feeling oddly vulnerable, but safe in that vulnerability. When he looked at me, it wasn't just desire in his eyes. It was something deeper, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a very long time. We stood there in silence for a long moment, just taking each other in. Then he walked up to me and pressed his body against mine, skin to skin, chest to chest, his hands moving over me like he was learning a language he'd always wanted to speak. The night stretched out before us, full of soft gasps, warm sheets, and whispered yeses. And for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow or yesterday. Just now. Just him. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the warmth of sunlight spilling across the bed, golden and soft like a secret. For a moment, I didn't know where I was, just the hazy comfort of a bed that wasn't mine, the scent of someone else's skin on my pillow, and the faint echo of rain that had stopped sometime in the night. Then I remembered Elias, the way he'd held me, not like a trophy or a conquest, but like something precious, the way he'd kissed my shoulders afterward, whispering something I couldn't quite hear but could feel like a lullaby under my skin. I rolled over and found the bed empty, the sheets still warm where he had been, and a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months settled in my chest. I pulled on a t-shirt, his, I realized as I caught the scent of him in the fabric, and padded barefoot into the small kitchen where Elias stood in boxers and a hoodie, humming something under his breath as he poured coffee into two mismatched mugs. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, and suddenly the awkwardness I'd expected just wasn't there. "You drink it black, right?" he asked, sliding one of the mugs toward me across the counter. "You remembered," I said, and it felt like a strange kind of intimacy, that detail. He'd actually listened. Most guys didn't. Most nights like this faded with the sunrise. But Elias was different. We sat on opposite sides of the kitchen island, drinking in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the city was just beginning to stretch its arms and yawn awake. Cars passing lazily through puddles, windows lighting up in tall buildings nearby. Inside, it was just us and the slow bloom of something I wasn't ready to name yet. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. Sure, I said, trying to act casual even though my heart skipped. Last night, that didn't feel like a one-time thing to me. Did it to you? It was a simple question, but it hit me like a wave. Because the truth was, I hadn't let myself hope for more. Not for a while, but now with him looking at me like that, like he really wanted to know, I couldn't lie. No, I said. It didn't feel that way to me either. He smiled again, this time smaller, more real. Good. I just needed to make sure I wasn't imagining it. We ended up spending most of the morning together, talking, eating toast he insisted on burning because he liked it extra crispy, and swapping stories about growing up gay in cities that didn't always welcome us. I told him about my ex, the one who left without saying goodbye. He told me about the time he came out to his mom, and she cried, not because she was sad, but because she was scared for him. There was something healing in that sharing, like we were stitching together pieces of ourselves and finding out they fit more easily than we thought. At one point, I stood behind him at the sink while he washed a plate, and I wrapped my arms around his waist without thinking. He leaned back into me, his head resting against mine, and for a moment, we just stood like that. Two men in a quiet kitchen, hearts beating in rhythm. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a fling or a lucky night. It might be the beginning of something real. We didn't plan to see each other again so soon, but by Tuesday evening, Elias had sent a simple message. Still thinking about your smile. Dinner? I said yes before I even finished reading it. This time, we met in a quieter part of town, a small Thai place with flickering candles on the tables, and the smell of lemongrass and jasmine rice hanging in the air. He was already waiting for me at a table near the window, wearing a navy shirt that clung to him in all the right ways, his smile lighting up the whole room as I walked in. Dinner was easy. Too easy. We talked like people who'd known each other for years, finishing each other's jokes, trading bites of pad thai and curry, brushing hands under the table like teenagers pretending not to be obvious. But then something shifted. It was when he asked, "So what do you do when you're not making out with strangers in bars?" I laughed, deflecting like I always do. You say that like it's a regular habit. He raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? I could have lied, said I was wild and free and full of reckless nights. But that wasn't the truth. Not anymore. I used to, I said finally. But that version of me doesn't show up much these days. He nodded, like he understood. And maybe he did, because the mood turned quieter after that. Softer, a little more fragile. I could feel the weight of his gaze, not hungry or flirtatious this time, but curious, searching. I've been there, he said, pretending it's all fun and freedom when really you just want someone who stays until the morning. His words hit something in me I didn't know was exposed. I looked down, tracing circles on my napkin. Yeah, that. We didn't talk much after that. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was safe. Full. Like we both understood we'd crossed into new territory, the kind that could either lead to something beautiful or break you if you weren't careful. We left the restaurant without touching, but when we reached his car, he leaned against the passenger door and looked at me. You want to come over? He asked, his voice low but steady. I nodded, and he opened the door for me, his hand resting gently on my back as I climbed in. Back at his place, it was quieter than last time. No storm, no frantic urgency, just the hum of the city far below and the warmth of two people slowly letting each other in. We sat on his couch again, close but not pressed together. He reached over and ran his fingers along my forearm, slowly, tracing the veins and the scars and everything I thought I had hidden. I like your silence, he said suddenly. Most people's silence is loud. Yours feels calm. I didn't know how to respond, so I leaned in and kissed him, gently, gratefully, and with a slowness that said, I see you too. This time, when our clothes came off, it wasn't about urgency. It was about exploration and comfort and rediscovering what it felt like to be touched with care. His hands moved over my chest and down my back in soft, grounding motions, as though he was learning my body not to own it, but to honor it. We lay there, tangled in sheets and breath, long after the kisses faded, the kind of closeness that didn't require words, but deep down, I knew something was coming, because nothing this perfect lasts without a crack. And sure enough, it came in the form of a phone call, buzzing on his nightstand just after midnight. He didn't answer it. He barely looked at the screen. But I did, and I saw the name. Chris. He noticed, saw my eyes shift, my shoulders tense. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice suddenly unsure. But it was too late. The air had changed. And just like that, the ghosts showed up. I didn't ask right away. I wanted to. I wanted to turn to him, naked in his bed with my heart in my throat, and ask, "Who's Chris?" But I didn't. Instead, I pulled the sheet up to my chest, trying to pretend like I wasn't suddenly freezing, like the warmth from his body wasn't slowly being replaced by something colder. Doubt? He noticed the shift. Of course he did. Elias was observant, thoughtful, the kind of man who noticed the way your smile dipped when something hurt or how your breathing changed when you were overthinking. He sat up slowly, his back against the headboard, and rubbed his eyes with both hands. "I was gonna tell you," he said, and that sentence alone made my stomach twist. "That's not usually how people start sentences when there's nothing to worry about," I said, trying to sound light. I failed. He exhaled deeply. He's my ex. Technically, emotionally, it's complicated." My chest tightened. Define complicated. He looked at me then, and his expression was raw. Guilty, yes, but also sad, honest. "We broke up 6 months ago. We haven't been together since. But he still calls sometimes, says he misses me, that he's working on himself. And, I don't know, a part of me still feels responsible for him. Responsible. Not in love. Not, I'm getting back with him. But still. Responsible." "That doesn't sound like closure," I said quietly. "It's not," Elias admitted. "But it's not love either. I swear to you, I didn't bring you here while juggling something else. You're not some rebound. You felt that, right?" I hated how much I wanted to believe him. Hated how badly I needed this thing we were building to be real. But I couldn't unsee the name. Couldn't unfeel the hesitation in his voice. "Do you still love him?" I asked, needing the answer to hurt or heal. No in between. He didn't answer right away. That pause was a knife. "I don't know," he said finally, eyes fixed on the ceiling, like maybe it would whisper the truth down to him. I nodded slowly, pulled the sheet tighter. "That's okay. You're allowed to not know." "But?" he asked. "But I can't be the thing that makes you forget him," I said. "I can't be the bandage. Not again." He moved toward me, reaching to touch my hand, but I pulled back, gently, still aching for him, but needing to protect myself from the fallout. "I should go," I said, my voice too calm to feel real. "You don't have to," he said quickly. "Please, just stay. Talk to me. Let me explain it better." "You already did," I said, standing and gathering my clothes piece by piece, like armor. The silence between us this time wasn't safe. It was sharp. He walked me to the door, barefoot, shirtless, hurting. I could feel it. But I also knew this wasn't about punishment. It was about timing, about knowing when to step back before stepping in too deep. "I meant everything," he said quietly as I stood in the doorway. "Every word, every kiss, every minute." "I believe you," I whispered, "but sometimes belief isn't enough." And I walked out. The air was colder than I remembered. The city was still lit up, but it felt dimmer somehow, as if something beautiful had turned its face away at the last second. When I got home, I sat on my bed for a long time, fully dressed, phone in my hand, his contact open, no texts, no calls, no good night. But I didn't delete him either, because part of me was still hoping he'd figure it out. 3 days passed. No texts, no calls. Not even a reaction to the photo I posted, one that I shamelessly curated to be casually heartbroken, but thriving. The kind you post when you want someone specific to see it, even though you pretend you don't. Each day, I checked my phone more times than I was proud of. I even caught myself typing out a message, just a casual, "Hey, hope you're okay," before deleting it and tossing my phone across the bed, like that would keep my dignity intact. But silence has a way of echoing, doesn't it? I busied myself. I went back to work, where everything felt too bright and too loud. I smiled when people talked to me, laughed when it was expected, nodded through meetings where I heard nothing, but under all of it was a dull ache, a quiet wondering. Was that it? On Friday, I walked by the rusty lantern again. I wasn't planning to go in. I wasn't even planning to be on that street. But there it was, familiar and heavy with memories. I stopped, just stood outside. The neon was flickering again. A couple of men sat inside nursing drinks, talking low. And then I saw him, Elias. He was at the far end of the bar, head tilted toward the bartender, laughing at something. His posture was relaxed, comfortable, like nothing was broken. For a moment, I felt like I was watching a scene from a life I had imagined but never actually lived. And I hated the heat that rose in my chest. Hated that I was both hurt and relieved to see him smiling. I turned to leave, and then he looked up. Our eyes met. It was just a moment, but in that second, his whole body language shifted. The smile faded. The casual lean became upright. He excused himself from the bar and started walking toward the door. I panicked. I turned to walk away, heart thudding, but before I got 2 steps down the sidewalk, I heard his voice. "Wait." I stopped. He came out, jacket half zipped, breath visible in the cool air. "I wasn't expecting to see you." "Same," I said, trying to sound neutral, but failing. My voice cracked just a little. He looked at me like I was something delicate he'd accidentally dropped. "I've been wanting to call," he said, "but I didn't know what to say." "You could have said you were thinking about me," I said. "You could have said you missed me." He exhaled like he'd been holding it in for days. "I did. I do." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "So what now?" Elias stepped closer, and for a second, I felt the familiar electricity, the tension, the pull. "I talked to Chris," he said. "Really talked. Told him I couldn't keep picking up the pieces for someone who kept walking away. That I needed to choose someone who was present. Someone who made me feel safe." I held his gaze. And did he understand? He didn't like it, but he understood. I crossed my arms, not out of anger, but to keep myself from reaching for him too soon. "So what does that mean for us?" "It means," he said softly, "that if you're still willing, I'd like to start over. For real this time. Just you and me." The words hit hard, but in a good way. The way rain hits dry ground after a long drought, soft at first, then soaking in deep. "I need to think," I said, even though my heart was already sprinting toward him. "I know," he said, and there was no pressure in his tone, just hope. We stood there, inches apart, neither of us moving. Then, impulsively, I leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "I'm thinking yes." The next few days weren't about passion. They were about patience. Elias didn't rush. He didn't ask to see me right away. Instead, he sent me small texts. A picture of a fresh loaf of sourdough he baked that cracked perfectly along the top. A link to a song we talked about during that first night. a single sentence that read, "Still thinking about your silence." And I responded, slowly at first, then with a kind of rhythm that felt familiar, like we were picking up a dance we had only just learned the steps to. By Wednesday, we had dinner again, this time at my place. I cooked, badly, and he pretended to like it, which made me laugh so hard I nearly dropped the bottle of wine. We didn't kiss right away. We didn't even sit too close. But there was comfort in the space between us, a knowing, a steadiness. We talked honestly this time, about the things we were afraid of, about our patterns, our pasts, the scars we carried that didn't always show. I told him about the night I almost deleted every dating app and swore off love for good. He told me about the panic attacks he sometimes got when he felt too much all at once. We listened. We didn't judge. Later that night, he asked if he could stay over. "Not for sex," he said quickly. "I just want to hold you, if that's okay." It was more than okay. We lay in bed, fully clothed, the kind of quiet settling between us that didn't need to be filled. His arm draped over my waist, and I turned into him, resting my head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady, reassuring, and I realized I was no longer holding my breath. "Do you think we can make this work?" I asked in the dark. His hand moved gently across my back, slow and grounding. "I don't think," he whispered. "I believe." It wasn't perfect. The next morning, he spilled coffee on my carpet, and I got irrationally annoyed. He apologized too quickly, and I overcompensated by laughing too loudly. But the important part? We caught ourselves. We reset. We moved forward. That weekend, he invited me to a gallery opening, a friend of his who painted moody abstract portraits of men with blurred faces. As we stood in front of one, he leaned in and whispered, "This one reminds me of you." I turned, surprised. Why? Because even when I didn't know the whole picture, I couldn't look away. Later that night, we found ourselves back at his place. It was different from the first time, slower, warmer. As he kissed me, unbuttoning my shirt one piece at a time, he whispered things. Not dirty things, not rushed things, but meaningful things. Compliments, observations, quiet reassurances spoken between touches. His fingers mapped my chest, his lips trailing over my shoulder with a kind of reverence that made me shiver. "I missed this," he said. "Not the sex, the closeness." I ran my hand through his hair and pulled him closer. Same. We didn't go further that night than skin against skin, breath against breath, but I had never felt more naked, more wanted, more chosen. That night, as I drifted to sleep wrapped in his arms, I wasn't thinking about the past. Not mine, not his. I was dreaming forward. 3 months later, I still hadn't left. Not permanently, not officially, but my toothbrush lived in his bathroom, and his hoodie had somehow become a regular fixture on my shoulders during chilly mornings on his balcony. We hadn't put labels on anything, hadn't made grand declarations, but every day began and ended with each other, and that was enough. We were still learning each other's habits. He liked to read with one leg curled under him, absently chewing the inside of his cheek. I tended to hum when I cooked, usually off-key. He always kissed my temple before leaving for work, even when we were running late. I always left him notes on the fridge, stupid little things like "Don't forget your smile" or "Leftover curry is mine." The ghost didn't vanish. Chris still called once, and Elias let it go to voicemail. He played it for me, just silence on the other end, a last echo, a goodbye without words. We had arguments too, small things. I hated how he left dishes in the sink. He hated how I sometimes shut down when I got overwhelmed. But we talked. We tried. We apologized without being prompted. That was new for both of us. One Sunday morning, after an unusually late night, I woke up to find him staring at me. Not in a creepy way, more like in a "how did I get this lucky" kind of way. "What?" I murmured, groggy but smiling. "Nothing," he said, pulling me close. Just sometimes I can't believe you're real. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling the familiar scent of sleep and skin and something uniquely his. You say that like you summoned me in a rainstorm or something. He laughed. Didn't I? We lay there in silence, warm and tangled in each other. Outside, the world was waking up. Birds chirping, cars passing, life buzzing along like it always does. But in that room, time slowed. I was going to the bar that night just to clear my head, I said softly. Didn't expect anything. He traced slow circles on my back. Neither did I. But then there you were, looking like someone I used to dream about before I stopped letting myself hope. That's when I said it. I love you. It came out quietly, unplanned, but clear. Honest. He didn't freeze. He didn't freak out. He smiled, soft, steady, and full of something I'd never seen on anyone's face before when looking at me. I love you too, he said, even when you steal the covers. We kissed then, not hungrily, not urgently, but deeply, like a promise, like a thank you, like a beginning. So yeah, I went to the bar for a quiet drink, but I walked out with something that didn't come in a glass.